They really didn't know anything about coding. They didn't know anything about the internet. They didn't understand. Even the CEO of the NBN was blaming gaming for being the big data use. So when people were downloading and streaming movies illegally on Kodi boxes, that's where all the data was going. I had to point that out to the then Federal Minister for Telecommunications, Susan Ley, but I don't think she even understood then.
G'day everyone, it's Pat here with the TMP channel, Techman Pat. I'm here with a special guest and we're going to do a special talk, a little bit of an interesting conversation. This is Michael Hoggett, the former CEO and founder of Coralbin Community Broadband. Welcome.
Good morning.
Where are you based, first of all? And then I'd love to hear about your background because you are a former CEO, so you've had a very illustrious past. I heard a little bit about it, but I want to find out more. And then maybe we'll talk about what we're going to talk about today. So, Michael, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Pat, I'm Brisbane born. I started my career in public service. I worked for Brisbane City Council before going to work for the Australian High Commission in London. I got out of public service, went into private enterprise. Working largely in land access for major projects, pipelines and rail and the thing. Became a single father, single guardian, I guess, at around 2012, and needed to do something where I could be both mum and dad and work from home. And the small town we were living in had terrible, if any, internet, unavailable for most. And internet's pretty important these days with young fellas going to school. So rather than just suffer that circumstances, decided to set up my own internet telco. And that's where the adventure started.
That's a pretty illustrious career, and becoming pretty much a single father, right? That's quite a lot.
It seemed like a lot at the time, but looking back, I wouldn't do anything differently.
No, fair enough. I heard the British side of things. What exactly was that part? If you can share.
No, that's all right. In the early 90s, I got the travelling bug and decided to go backpacking. A friend and I travelled to London. I ended up taking a job in the Australian High Commission.
Wow.
That was an eye-opener, I guess. I worked with Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Department of Defence. And then actually ended up working for the Queensland Premier's Department a bit later on, just up the road from the Australian High Commission at Queensland House. So had some wonderful adventures over there.
Wow, that's I'd love to dig in more into that, but I suppose what is relevant to our conversation is that last bit about starting an internet company in Coralbin, which you have already corrected me. I'm not great with names, so please forgive me.
No.
But I think your career and context gives us a lot of information on how, I guess, the story that you have for us today. So maybe for those following at home, we're speaking with Michael to find out a little bit about what he went through when he set up his business, his internet business. And I think maybe some, I guess from what you've told me earlier, some context on how it's changed now and what you're seeing today. It'd be great to understand. And maybe a little bit if somebody is planning on starting their own RSP or some sort of business in that region. And I think a lot of talks that I've done on my videos have been about the lack of internet in regions like that. So maybe it'd be great to hear about your experience in your small town, about what lack of internet has caused or how you actually got, hey, that's a great idea. That seems like something we need. What was the trigger for you to start that business?
The trigger was the terrible service we were getting at the time. At the time, it was only ADSL available in town, and it was with a copper network that hadn't been upgraded since it was laid, probably in the early 70s.
Right.
Um, the conversation really was one where I put it out on Facebook if anyone in town was interested in starting one up, and I actually got my first response was from the fellow who actually ended up working with me through the whole 7 years. The first mistake I made was trying to do it with a committee.
Oh, okay.
Because there were a lot of doubters who didn't think it could be done. And the moment they realised that we could do it, they tried to take control of it. But at that point, I actually owned it. So I just got rid of the committee.
Right. But the committee was there to help, hopefully, and open some doors. Was that the idea?
The idea was to involve the community in the construction of the project. But really, the core of myself and James and one other chap, we had all the parts necessary there to do it without relying on others. And I think that the problem with the committee was that a lot of them weren't coming at it from the same angle as I was. I'm more of a service-orientated person. Some of them were more interested in making money.
Right.
And being the small town we were, without rapid expansion, we were never going to be a major telco.
Right.
So I ended up funding it all myself, and then operating and maintaining it myself. I guess in the end, in the very last year, it was just myself running the whole thing. But I also discovered I had a fear of heights.
Just at that point in time, in
the moment I had to go up a high place, I discovered that I wasn't good at heights.
Right. That's such a late discovery in life, I think.
Yeah, it was. I don't think I'd had a problem with heights before I actually was relying on it.
Right. I'd like to think, and maybe coming back to what you said there, some people were in it for the money. I'd like to think that if you take care of your customers, that side will take care of itself. Maybe.
Yeah.
And I know in Silicon Valley, it's all about the customer, putting the customer first. So I'd like to think some other companies could do that too. So you've started a business. You've had a bit of input from the community, but you've put that aside and gone, you know what, I'm going to do this. So what exactly did you have to do? What construction from maybe just, because this was before the NBN, right? This was early.
Well, the NBN had begun, but it wasn't going to roll out. We weren't due to get the NBN, I believe, until 2020 at that point. And this was 2016 when we had the first conversations between James and I online. What was involved was, first off, I had to go through the procedure of applying for a telecommunications license with the federal government. We were issued license 446. After I cleared character checks with my background,
Sure.
Not having any issues previously. After that, then it was really working out how we were going to do it. My original thought was I was going to pay to run a fibre optic in from what I thought, or where Telstra wholesaler told us where the fibre optic cable was running along the highway. But it turns out that was completely false information.
There's
So
no fibre there along the highway.
There was no fibre there at all to connect up to. But fortunately, James was aware of wireless technology, and it just so happened that almost to the month where I decided to do it, the prices of Ubiquity equipment, I don't know if you're familiar
Yes.
with Ubiquity, had come down by about 80%. And I was able to buy a couple of servers quite cheaply. And then it was a matter of putting a couple of 12-metre poles up around the valley. And because it was a valley, if you were going to set up, the ideal place to set up these days would be a flat town. You'd only need the one transmission pole. But because we were a valley, there were a number of corners we had to broadcast into. So we ended up putting up 4 towers in the end. And I probably wouldn't go as high as I did, because once the equipment's up there, you have to get back up if there's any issues to
Sure.
fix it. So don't build high.
Hence the height issues.
Yeah, don't. If you're on top of a hill, you don't need to put the tower 12 meters in the air. You could probably get away with something a lot lower, and you'll be able to get to the equipment a lot easier. And if you have an issue with heights, lower is better.
So you had 4 towers that would navigate from the fiber point somewhere out of town or further out.
No. So what would happen? Okay, so for to get backhaul in the first place was impossible.
Right.
I end up having to combine multiple ADSL lines together to generate enough backhaul to supply the town.
Right.
So we end up having to have a load balancer as part of the as one of the servers. So we would have to run a number of lines. We started off with 3 lines, ran 3 lines in through the balancing server and an authentication server. And then I would broadcast from the roof of my property to the towers, and then from the towers then out to the rest of the community.
So can you give us a bit of context about the load balancer, what exactly it does and how it enables to have 3 lines or 4 lines into one?
Right, so basically it's directing the requests of the traffic from the customers coming back in through the towers to individual lines. So you wouldn't get one of the initial problems was because you'd get line switching, so it would switch between the opposite different lines. So basically then we used sticky connections. So so once a customer had connected in, they would stick to the one line, and that would basically allow the required data to be shared out to whoever was requesting at the time. But that way they weren't getting a switch in. They were getting a consistent connection because they were using just the one line.
Yeah.
Rather than having them switch between lines, which would cause problems. Obviously, if they're doing searches and something like that, it would show up for different IPs for them.
Yes.
If that was the case.
So you've got a couple lines going to your house, and from your house you've got this Ubiquity equipment that you managed to get 80% off on sale.
Well, no, it wasn't on sale. It just so happened that the prices had dropped away. Yeah, It had crashed. Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think it was about the same time Bitcoin was about $3,000, I think, for a Bitcoin at the time. So you put all that in context.
Yeah.
So that had happened. The equipment was cheapish, cheaper than it had been, and it was capable of carrying faster speeds than anything else that had been on the market previously.
What kind of speeds would you expect a customer to get, for example, if you're...
With the way the ADSL was working, a lot of the customers were only able to get 1.5 megabits per second prior to us beginning to broadcast. We had a large pipeline. We could have done 2 gigabits per second for most of the customers, but we never had the backhaul to carry that.
Right. So the Ubiquity equipment could reach those speeds, but
not
you
a
didn't
problem.
have the backhaul. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, we had a big pipe, and we were trickling a hose down through it.
So in a perfect world, Telstra would have run a fiber up to from a freeway or whatever into the town, a single location. Then you could have distributed that across and given the town.
Ideally, I was only 80 meters from the exchange. That's where my problem was. So I was fortunate, and I had one of the better connections in town.
Right.
So it didn't lose a lot of integrity through the copper network. Whereas, as I said, 2 kilometers away, they were getting 1.5 megabits per second, and then you go past that 2 kilometers, and they were getting nothing.
Yes. Okay. And how many people were in the town at the time when you set up?
There was 600 homes.
600 homes. Okay. And did
about 1,600 people.
Did you manage to serve all 600 homes in the end, or?
I could have, but we didn't, because basically limits. I had limits on how much backhaul I could get hold of. And then there were others that had access to mobile data. I would look after people who had no alternative.
Gotcha.
At first, and then those who had businesses and the like, who couldn't operate on that slow speed that they were getting through ADSL, we'd provide a connection for them.
So how many premises would you be serving at peak, for example?
At peak, 180.
Okay, that's a decent count. That's quite a substantial one for a small regional town like that.
Yeah, it was good. We actually provided free connections to all the businesses in town, and I had a couple of areas where we provided a free Wi-Fi space, say in the market in the town square, where people could connect, and which came in really handy for people during COVID. Because this was all pre-COVID. This was all pre-NBN. The one thing that did happen was because I started doing this was that suddenly there was an interest in the town by the majors. I think Telstra and NBN invested 10 times what I spent in improving their systems. And the NBN rollout was actually brought forward by 4 years. So they came into town and rolled out on the same day we began transmission.
Right. So straight away you had kind of competition, I guess, in a roundabout way.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. That when the NBN was rolled out, it actually made things worse.
Oh, how so?
Well, speeds. There were areas of town that had previously been able to get that 1.5 or megabits per second or something approaching that. That could no longer get any internet. So that actually increased our customer load.
So I'm assuming it wasn't all smooth sailing throughout this sort of process. if you were to go,
that's a good assumption.
If there was something that was keeping you up at night throughout that period, what was that one thing that you were just struggling with every time?
Look, the equipment itself and the way we built the network, it was amazing. Yeah, I'm surprised at, with a system that had so many potential points of failure. It was that the equipment itself never failed.
Right. Okay.
Throughout that 7 years. Worst case was the biggest problem we had was customers damaging their own equipment, or more often than not, the problem was they'd switched the modem off, or someone come in and pulled the plug out and put a vacuum cleaner in or something like that in there. And I get a call saying, "Why isn't my internet working?" And I'd have a look to see whether they're all connected or not, and see they weren't connected. I said, "Well, is it switched on?" They go check the point and turn it on. And that was pretty much as hard as it got. The things that I didn't think to do were quite simple things. One of the biggest issues we had was during a really heavy storm, a simple bolt snapped in the mast on the tallest tower in the most awkward place. And if I'd spent 50 cents more on a better bolt, I could have saved myself $1,000 hiring a crane to come out and replace that. So it's those things. You don't cheap out on your infrastructure. You build it robustly, and look, there were lots of nights where I was worried about failures, because I'm watching the system pretty intently, and I'm looking for patterns, just being a human being, and I'm looking for things that might be going wrong. And occasionally, me trying to fix something that I interpreted as a problem was actually the problem.
You're touching it too much, and things were just...
Yeah, I should. So there are times that I was the cause of the issue, because I was trying to prevent an issue. It didn't happen that often.
Yep.
And if it did, I'd only do those things at 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning. Oh man, just leave things alone if they're working.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But I guess we've got one lesson here: is don't cheap out on your infrastructure.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Don't go for the 30-cent bolt versus the $1.50 bolt. Okay, go for the stronger bolt. It's going to come back and bite you.
So NBN started rolling out their infrastructure around your area. Did that cause any friction with what you were doing versus what they were trying to do? Apart from obviously some issues with speed for some customers.
I saw that as a win.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to keep this town connected. Just having internet available increased the value of everyone's homes out there. I welcome them coming out. I don't think they saw me in a good light.
Right.
But no, I welcomed any investment in the town. It was about growing the town and growing the community. I actually offered our system a number of times to NBN as a test bed for essentially what they're doing now.
Right.
So I actually went and spoke to the Senate in 2018 during the NBN rollout inquiry into the rollout in rural areas, and I advised them to build systems like my own. And now it's happening. It'd be a lot easier to start a network now because if I'd had Starlink as backhaul,
yep.
None of the problems I had with backhaul at the beginning or during the entire project would have been an issue. In fact, one of the last things I was doing was looking at using Starlink to replace our existing backhaul. But I don't know if you're aware, but when Starlink first started operating in Australia, they were very hard to get hold of to speak to anyone.
Right. And you wouldn't be able to create some sort of deal for some very specific, I suppose, plans or technology.
Look, I wrote a snail mail letter to Elon Musk.
No reply?
No reply.
Ah, that's unfortunate. At least I know some brands receive letters, or like famous people. You usually get like a written letter from a secretary saying, yes, John Smith has received your letter. Thank you very much. Here's a signature. You know, Elon should definitely do that.
Well, the model that I suggested is now what Telstra are doing in small communities, where they're now in partnership with Starlink. So they rather than using NBN as backhaul, they'll use a Starlink to this dish to run the internet and then broadcast it out through a wireless internet service. Exactly what we were doing. So
you were basically just avoiding the need to run new cables, even if it was fiber, to these homes, because at a scale of 600 homes, it's definitely not viable to put all this stuff in from a monetary point of view.
The wireless equipment worked perfectly.
Yeah.
Ubiquiti itself has network monitoring programs where I could keep track of the distance of the angles all the dishes are at, what version all the dishes were on. 2:00 in the morning, I could do an update to update all the dishes around town to the current versions. Without the Ubiquiti equipment, it was impossible to do what we did.
Do you think? Why do you think NBN never looked at something like that, like a simple? Because that seems really simple.
No, they did. Unfortunately, what happened was, if you've heard of Vision Stream.
Oh yes, that was a long time ago. It seems.
Yeah, same time. Yeah. So Vision Stream had bought into. They'd bought proprietorial rights to a type of wireless internet device, but they bought it in 2012 when the equipment was much slower and worse. So they owned thousands of. This is where a lot of money that NBN spent went on thousands of these dishes that couldn't broadcast any faster than 12 megabits per second.
Right, and are they still being used today?
Oh yeah, I saw one the other day when I was walking through South Brisbane. I don't know whether it was working, but it was bolted on the side of one of the government buildings there. So people might have seen them. They're square-looking dishes like that, in a diamond shape. They're normally that way. But that equipment is so out of date by 2016. It itself was a bottleneck.
Right, and so from
they couldn't, because they bought the license to that equipment. They couldn't use equipment like Ubiquiti, so it actually limited what they could actually do.
Because they committed to something else, turned out to be not the right choice, and then
they jumped too early. Look, even when we were there, when I first began broadcasting, the government gave Vision Stream $1 million to build a tower to broadcast in competition with us. and they held town meetings where they told us that they were going to provide a better service and do everything. And then by the time it was due to roll out, they just quietly pocketed the money and never built
Never
the system.
rolled out.
They never rolled out.
Never even put a bolt on a roof.
Never.
It sounds like it would have been a 50-cent bolt.
Yeah. Oh, well, they had, as I said, they were given $1 million to upgrade the existing tower we had in town. We had an Optus tower and we had a Telstra tower. The feed into town came in through the Telstra tower and then ran down to the exchange. There was no physical cable running into Carralton. It was all wirelessly coming to town anyway.
So yeah, I'm just trying to map it out. So you've got wireless into a tower, Telstra tower, and then to the exchange. And from the exchange, copper wires, and you were the closest-ish, and you were able to get a couple of connections, and then from there on, do the Ubiquity wireless to all the other homes and businesses.
Yep.
Then provide them basically, an alternative to Telstra and Optus Mobile.
Yeah, well, not mobile, but to the home broadband.
Home broadband.
There was Telstra Mobile available, but because it's a valley, it wasn't available to everyone in town. There were shadows from the ridges.
Even for mobile.
Yeah, even for mobile. So by building multiple locations around town, I was able to circumvent those shadows. And it actually, so we were available to everyone, but at the same time limited by backhaul, so I couldn't service everyone.
What was the feedback from the community to you, for example, from a access?
Well, at the start, I was crazy. Then when they realised it was possible, that's when people thought, well, I want to jump in now. And the ones who said I was crazy were the ones who wanted to make a big profit out of it.
Right.
When we started, you were paying $119 to Telstra a month for, as I said, it might be a megabit and a half. It might be right sort of service. When we began, we never increased our prices. We started at $55 a month, and I offered unlimited broadband. I was the first company in Australia to actually give out unlimited broadband.
The data side.
Yeah, unlimited data.
Wow.
So, and at the same time, I was limited on how much backhaul I had.
Yes.
So, by the end of the first 6 months, I was just scraping under our usage. And a couple of times I went over, but I'd ring my providers and say, can you provide that extra, gigabit of data that you say is available to us 3 times a year? And they do that, and we just scrape in. And I think because we were doing unlimited, there was some pressure from politicians on the telcos to, if this little guy's doing unlimited, why aren't you doing unlimited data? And I think we had a bit to play in ending that construct in Australia where we were being charged for data.
Oh, that was, I remember that, and I was so excited to see unlimited. And it wasn't a big price jump either. It's not like people were smashing, 1 terabyte back then anyway. I do have a question then. For your customers, how much data was flowing through a small regional tower like that, through your system?
Because, when you start, you're obviously not connected to everyone at once.
Sure.
Okay, I had to roll out, had to do installations as customers signed on. So it wasn't until the end of the first 6 months that we were actually going through the 3 terabytes of data.
Wow. So,
and by that time, our supplier said, it's unlimited data for you now too. So that problem solved itself.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And then
ended that construct. Yay.
That's a big win. If that was based on your implementation of the unlimited and everybody else got it, we've got a lot of thanking for you, Michael, to do.
I like to tell myself that. But I think that a lot of the pressure came from other people simply because we were doing it and it was possible. the whole idea of limiting data was to not tax. The original idea was to not tax the existing systems. But the telcos were never paying a price for data. It wasn't costing them more or less, which is why they were doing free days. I think you remember they would do free days where you could download as much as you want, and people would download all of Wikipedia or something like that. So it wasn't not possible. It was something they could have switched on themselves years beforehand, but there was money to be made in rationing data.
Yeah. And putting people on more expensive one that had more and so on. I remember in IONET days, they had from 1 a.m. to 8 a.m. or 7. It was it was not free, but it was like a different bucket of usage, right? You had like 20 for the night and maybe 30 for the evening. And you could...
Those seems like ancient times now, don't they?
It does. It feels very, very much long ago. Did any of the did Telstra or Optus or anyone that was in that same area give you guys any trouble?
I'm not going to talk about that. Some of those companies look, because I was dealing with the wholesalers. I was dealing with Telstra Wholesale, and before and after Telstra Wholesale, I was dealing with NBN. I would honestly say that Telstra Wholesale didn't want us to exist.
Right. Okay. And yet they were a wholesaler to sell to. Yeah.
Look, but hey, that's only speculation on my part. I can't say that's the case. But they weren't real helpful. So I actually saw. I spoke with the state government and the federal government members to see what support I could get. And it was actually through those connections that I ended up speaking at the NBN inquiry in 2018. But I never really got any help. I was more used as a cudgel to hit the other side with.
So no subsidies, no financial help, no opening doors.
Paid for everything myself, and I ran at a loss for most of the time. But we were providing a free service to the local businesses. The value of people's homes increased because they had internet available. I think I gave away about conservatively $500,000 in back to the communities, and we were charging half the price of the competitors. So you'll notice that the prices across Australia came down to around $55 to $60. Well, that's what we started at.
Now that feels a long time ago too, because now we're back to 80, 70, 90.
Well, I was the base of the market, and I left at the beginning of 23.
Right.
When I left, there was no base to the market anymore, and started to come up again.
I want to hear more about what happened during sort of the pandemic period, because a lot more people were obviously stuck at home, and regional towns had it even more difficult. I do remember at some point you couldn't go out to the regional towns, right? You couldn't drive out. We were blocked from that. How did the town take that?
Look, that's. I think that's the first time I started seeing divisions in the community.
Right.
That was tough, and that was the first time I've started hearing about websites like Rumble and other things like that. People, I feel. Because I was supplying the internet, I was enabling a lot of misinformation to arrive.
Right.
There's and I personally that hurt that I was enabling that. But then I guess most telcos don't have feelings, and when you're doing it on your own, you can't. You have to be completely impartial. It doesn't matter what people believe or think. It has nothing to do with me.
Sure.
I was merely providing a service. Where they went with what they looked up, what they did, entirely their own business. So I had to. I went personally. I went very quiet. I didn't didn't engage too much with the rest of the community. But by that point, when COVID had rolled out, I'd already been trapped in my home since I started running this telco.
Nothing changed for you, but that's yeah.
And Toby and I, laughed because suddenly the rest of the world had to live like we were.
That's I can imagine a lot of people who are already working from home, and then everybody's like, yeah, we're all working from home. It's new to them. They're like, they're doing this for a long time. But in a business that you can't step away because you're constantly monitoring and watching. So how many people did you have some support in your own team? Did you have a few people with you?
Initially, yes.
Right.
Look, I had a very good friend who we still talk pretty regularly. James, who was the real genius behind this. He was up to speed with everything that was. He's much like yourself. He was up to speed with everything technically. Brilliant coder.
Oh, that's not like me then. that's an art. I love coders. It's an amazing art.
Well, he was self-taught, and there was another benefit of me doing this as well, because I gave my boy an opportunity to learn a trade without knowing he was learning a trade. It was the best trick I ever played.
I'm going to take notes for my own son. Trick him into learning something. That's going to be great.
Look, get him the moment he can start operating a computer. Okay, here's a good one. Pokemon is an excellent way to get kids to learn how to spell.
Okay, how so?
Right? Because they want to know what attack to use.
Yes.
Right. And instead of asking you every time which one's block or which one's scratch, they'll start to work it out themselves.
Yeah.
So that he learned how to spell from playing Pokemon on the Nintendo.
A Switch or whatever it might be, yeah.
Game Boy, on a Game Boy. That's what they were called. And the same thing with my nephew. That was where he learned to spell, was because he would come to me and ask, "What's this tag?" And I said, "You're going to have to figure this out, buddy. This is because I'm not here all the time." So then they'd learn to spell the words, and then it was a good way to do that. I always made sure my boy had access to PCs from the moment he started to learn how to use them. First off, I started him off with the PS2 and Spyro.
I love Spyro. That was good times.
Yes. So he's a Spyro man too. So he'll still buy a Spyro game if one came out tomorrow. Then made sure he had a PC so we could talk remotely, because at the time I wasn't. When this was happening, I wasn't there all the time. I was working fly in, fly out, or on different projects.
Gotcha.
And it wasn't until I had him on my own after 2012 that I was always there. So I always made sure that we were able to communicate. By the time he was 12, he'd already surpassed my knowledge with computing. So that's gone on to serve him so well as an adult.
This comes back to a lot of what I believe in. I really think if you don't have access to the internet growing up, you're going to get left behind. Did you notice that in any of the families of people that you serve? That
I had no internet when I was growing up.
Yeah, but there's a digital divide now, isn't there? Do you think giving access to families in regional areas is?
Yeah, look, the sooner you can introduce children to technology, the more innate it will be to them.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah. Well, it's a huge boost. If you're denying them access to it, then you're only stunting their potential, because that's where the world's going.
Yeah, safely, of course, in a way that
not unsupervised,
of course.
But at the same time, he learnt more about it when I wasn't looking over his shoulder.
Yeah, as is tradition. Let them try things, but I think there's still a little bit of control that needs to be put in place.
Oh, absolutely. No, I look. When I was, he racked up, I think, $3,000 on charges on an iPhone one month. That was a bit of a shock to pay.
I mean, that could be a whole conversation in itself. How easy it is.
Well, that's a lesson for me. That was a lesson we learned. So that was
So I wanna really delve a little bit deeper, if possible, into that Senate inquiry, into that conversation you had with there. I think it's, we don't get to speak to a lot of people who were fronted around that and the topic of NBN and you having experience and providing services to a local community. Give me a little bit of a rundown. What it was, how did it start? How did you get there? What did you talk? What did you present? What did you talk about? And what was I really want to hear what was, and I know this is a lot of questions, what was the Senate's, outcome after the fact? What did they think of what you said, if they even gave you feedback?
Okay, so how it happened was I'd approached because I was naive. I was looking for support from the government. I thought perhaps that they would be interested, but as I said, I became a cudgel to beat the other side with. I'd gone in to see one of the two Queensland senators, met him in town, and shown him the equipment and what was actually how simple it was to actually run a wireless network. How you didn't have to have corridors, you didn't have to dig up people's land, you didn't have to build easements. Basically, you just needed a transmission point, and then you put the receiver on the roof of the customer's house and run a cable down to a modem.
Such a lightweight solution. It's
just such a small impact, and you could deliver it to anywhere that you could pick up the signal. It could be to a garden shed. To quite often we actually set up temporary connections for the mountain bike track there, so they could film. They could actually broadcast the starts and finishes. So it was just a matter of me running down with a pole, sticking a pole in the ground, pointing a dish at one of our towers, and they had a Wi-Fi spot there in the middle of the paddock.
That's awesome. That is really cool, and that's an interesting use case. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all you needed was a car battery to power it, or just a deep cycle battery. So long as they had some sort of power source, you could run it. That was all that was required, a power source.
Wow.
Speaking to the inquiry, I became aware that the people advising our politicians were script kiddies. They didn't know anything about. They really didn't know anything about coding. They didn't know anything about the internet. They didn't understand. Even the CEO of the NBN was blaming gaming for being the big data use. And this is the time Cody box. You remember Cody boxes?
Yes, I do.
Right. So when people were downloading and streaming movies illegally on Cody boxes, that's where all the data was going.
No, it was the gamers. Mm.
Yeah. So I had to point that out to the then Federal Minister for Telecommunications, Susan Ley.
Right.
But I don't think she even understood then. But the one good thing that came out of the inquiry was that I secured the bandwidth that we were broadcasting on as a free bandwidth that's now available to any telco that wants to start up. That will always be open. And that was one of the recommendations that came out of the Senate inquiry. So there's not something. That's one of the things they don't have to ever worry about is buying a license for a frequency. That frequency is open forever.
That's awesome. So we got to thank you for the prices, the unlimited bandwidth, and now basically every single other RSP that wants to spin one up.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So okay, sorry, go on.
You're right. And from well, at the same time, that was self-interest. I was trying to secure my own future too.
Yeah.
So the fact that it benefited everyone else is, you're welcome. But that was really me trying to secure our future, and so a byproduct of that. Out of that inquiry, I think that's when the NBN and others actually maybe started to take some note about us.
Right. Put you on the radar.
Yeah, I think, and maybe not in a great way because I criticised the CEO of the NBN.
Not great.
No, well, in the blaming gamers for the data usage. I mean,
Sure.
you're talking about bits per second instead of megabits per second, just for sending commands back and forwards over a game. It's not like they're.
It's tiny. It's
Tiny,
as much as
tiny.
email.
It was almost like, oh my god, these are the people running the show.
It's hard. I can imagine it's quite hard. If you look at somebody playing a video game, there's visual things, there's things happening all the time, but that's all rendered locally, and it's communication of less than the size of text.
Yeah. No, the fact that the person running the biggest company in the country with communications didn't understand that showed the disconnect between the people actually doing the work and the management.
Right.
They hadn't. If he thought that, then there'd be no communication. So, or no understanding. I just think it was easy to blame kids.
It always is.
Yeah, but they're still doing it now. They're blaming them for crime.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So maybe I'm fishing here, but was there anything else that you noted that there was a disconnect between what was reality and what they were seeing?
How simple it was.
Right. Okay.
At the time, the NBN, and I think they still do, were paying themselves bonuses of 66 million every year.
Yes.
You could have hooked up all of rural Queensland for that price.
Based on what you've just told me today, absolutely. I can absolutely imagine that because it's so simple.
The outlay for me to build for the one town between $65,000 and $75,000,
and that would serve roughly 600 homes potentially.
Easily more. It only cost that much because I had to build multiple towers. If you're in a flat town out in the country where they already have a wheat silo or an existing communications tower, they don't have to build the tower. They just need to clamp onto the existing one. It was just that I had to do everything from scratch. Of course, it depends on who owns the tower. Where originally I had tried to avoid building my own towers and had approached Telstra Wholesale about clamping onto their existing tower. But they were looking to bankrupt me with a rental fee every month of, I think it was like $4,500 to put a meter wide dish on their tower.
That's insanity. Why? You wouldn't even be using
because they're profit motivated. It's not a service. Whereas this should be a service focused industry, as you said, like a lot of the ones in Silicon Valley. Everyone looked at this with dollars in their eyes and was coming about it the wrong way. If at the same time I was giving a lot away and I wasn't cutting people off when they didn't pay their bills, so I gave a lot away, but I just didn't have it in my heart to cut off a family with 6 kids from the internet. I couldn't do that. I'll give them time to come back, or I'll even run it for another 6 months while they haven't paid, just so they had access. I just couldn't do it. It's not in me to do that.
Fair enough.
I've got to go to bed with me every night.
Exactly. And so, what's happening right now? Because you're a former CEO. So what's happened to the business? What's happened to the town?
When town's doing great. The town went through a huge growth spurt because we. If you had a look at the maps at the time, we were one of the brightest points for Wi-Fi on the map in the area.
Wow.
The town had a lot of people come in after COVID. Mm-hmm. A lot of people bought up. My friends who I originally set it up with had sold and moved away. This is why I was there on my own. And my boy had finally got into a stable relationship and moved out for the last time.
Oh, right.
Because he'd been away and come back and been away and come back. And then I just ended up haunting the house on my own for like a year. And it was tough. And then Starlink came.
Yep.
And I bought a Starlink dish to test out to see whether we could use it as a backhaul. I couldn't get hold of anyone at Starlink.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, do I keep doing this 24/7 for another 10 years, another 7 years or whatever, or do I just hand over and go back to restarting my life that I sort of stopped?
Right.
And it just made sense. There were a lot of sleepless days in a row. Plus, everything was starting to, I'd been running for 7 years at that point. I was getting to a point where I was going to probably have to start reinvesting in new equipment.
Sure.
And there was a much better alternative.
Yeah, and it's just there.
Even though NBN never picked up the slack,
Mm-hmm.
I handed a lot of my customers straight over to Starlink. I actually ended up doing the installations on their roofs and things like that.
Wow.
I made sure every customer I had an alternative to go to,
Yes.
and then I just slowly weaned everybody off. And at the end of February 2023, I think the 28th was the last night I broadcasted.
Wow.
Switched off the system and walked away.
How do you feel now?
It was the best time. It was the worst time and the best time.
Best time.
Look, the amount of good that I felt like I was doing was even though it was exhausting me. I was going without food at times. It was just tough. And at the same time, I'm going without food, and I've got to make sure that the kid doesn't know that he's got all the food, right?
Yep.
I'm just hiding the fact that things are tough. It was time to go. I was pretty exhausted, I think. Plus, because I'd focused entirely on the business and keeping that going, and the constant worries about failure points.
Yep.
And the guys who'd started with me had all moved away. One of them had started a family. The other guy had gone to another place and bought a new house over there. And he was more into building the house than being available. It just made sense. And as I said, there was now a viable alternative.
Yes.
So it was. I could put down the burden, but gee, I miss it.
It's fun doing something, isn't it? Something so dependable.
Just
Everybody's
something
depending on it.
But I let my health go. Right, I stacked on weight.
Yep.
I just let a lot of things that I probably should have been maintaining go, and I picked up a lot of that. I started going to the gym and doing things now and getting myself back in order. But you go in and you got black hair and you come out looking like this.
So then the last question, Michael, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're welcome.
What would you say to somebody in your position before you got the grey hair, looking to service maybe a regional area or maybe a small RSP, something like that, based on that experience that you've had?
It would be the best thing you've ever done. Don't ever look at what your customers are doing. Don't cheat out on the... You have to look everybody in the eye.
Yeah.
In a small town like that, some people are going to be jealous of you. Some people are going to be angry at you.
Sure.
But walking through Coles and having kids point at you and say, "That's the internet man."
Oh, that is cool.
yeah. To be recognised by and it's not the parents that recognise you; it's the kids, because they're the ones who are really grateful. It is rewarding. It was one of the best things I ever did in my life. Not the best thing, but at the same time, it helped me train the best thing in my life with a career of his own.
Absolutely.
And I tricked him. He had no idea he was learning.
I think that's my biggest takeaway, though. There's a lot of great info there. I think that is it, right? Trick your kids into learning. They'll thank you for it. How's your son thank you for it?
I think he has he thank me for it. He's in his 20s. I don't thank you for anything.
Not yet. You wait.
Not yet.
You wait. Michael, thank you so much. When you reached out, I actually didn't know how big the story was, and I think this is a fantastic story of the last 10 years, you'd say. Yes, nearly 7 to 10, right? Because you had a lot of stuff.
Well, there was planning beforehand, but it came together pretty quick. It's not that expensive to do. It's a tremendous benefit to your community. It's a lot easier to do now if you had Starlink as a backhaul, setting up much as like Telstra and Optus are now doing, because they're bringing into partnerships. If I could have got hold of Starlink in that last 6 months, I might still be doing it.
Right. Okay.
But I couldn't get hold of. No one would respond. So it might be different now. It might be easier to set up a partnership. But it's a really good thing you can do. It helps everyone in the community. It improves the value of everyone's homes. You could do it and make more money out of it than I did.
Sure.
But I am of a service background, and I was more interested in being of service than I was profiting. So it probably would have been a lot easier to handle. If I charged more, it would have been a lot easier to handle the emergencies when they happen, like hiring the crane to fix the tower and things like that. But I'm just amazed at how many times when things were right up against the wall, the universe would just come in and drop 10 grand in my lap, and I could keep going. So I think that happened about 5 times. We looked at expanding, and we could have been bigger than we were.
Sure.
But if I'd gone to multi-towns and ended up on my own, it would have killed me. So if you've got a patch and you can look after your patch, do that. That's an easy way to do it, and you can make an income out of it.
What I hear here is that it's less complex than people make it out to be, and certainly less complex than the Senate makes it out to be.
Yeah. Oh, look. We ended up running. I bought 3 servers to run the system in the first place. We ended up running the whole thing on one server with virtual machines.
Right.
So it's not as difficult as you might imagine. Yes, there are elements to it that are difficult, but equipment failure isn't the issue. It's those 50-cent bolts.
Let's finish on that. 50-cent bolts. Never skimp out on them. Again, Michael, thank you for your time. We've got a decent hour of an amazing chat. Folks following up at home, please comment below. I'm sure Michael will probably jump in the comments and answer any questions. So thank you again. Much appreciated.
My pleasure, Pat.
Great.
All right, you have a lovely afternoon.
See you too, Michael.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks.